get up.
There goes John Cook on his way to execution. Cook was a lawyer who had called for a death sentence to be passed against the King of England. For that, he now faced the worst punishment English justice could devise. 3 days before, his fellow prisoner, Thomas Harrison, had endured the same fate. Hanged, drawn and quartered at Charing Cross. They stuck Harrison's head on Cook's hurdle to give the lawyer a foretaste of what was to come. Over the course of a week in the autumn of 1660, 8 others would face the same punishment. A further 19 would be imprisoned for life. At the climax of the English Civil War, they had put King Charles I on trial and executed him for the harm he had done his people. These were the regicides, the king killers. Even in defeat and death, what these men did changed England forever. The judge who tried the king had been the first to sign the royal death warrant. As the morning passed, 58 others added their signatures and seals. Oliver Cromwell, their leader, signed in 3rd place. The next morning, King Charles I was beheaded. After 7 years of civil war, England had become a republic. But the republic lasted no longer than Cromwell himself. Soon after Cromwell's death, King Charles II returned to claim his father's throne. But before the new king could be crowned, the republic had to be laid to rest. The king killers had to stand trial. This is a true story taken directly from trial transcripts and other first-hand testimony.
Let the court come to order. God save the king.
My lord, gentlemen of the jury, we bring before you into judgment this day the murderers of a king.
Solicitor General Sir Heneage Finch was a new man for these new times. He had played no part in the politics of the Civil War. Now he was out to make a name for himself in this high-profile case.
The judges, the officers, and the other immediate actors in this black, bloody act were in number about 80. Now, some 25 of them are already dead, among them the arch-usurper, Cromwell. And though perhaps some may have died in peace, be assured that they soon came before a judge more terrible than any here on earth. Some 18 or 19 have fled justice, and they wander to and fro about the world with the mark of Cain upon them. They cannot hide forever. They will be found.
And found they were, sooner or later. Through kidnap, extradition and assassination, half a dozen regicides who had managed to flee the country would endure the king's vengeance.
29 persons remain and do now expect your justice.
These were the regicides, typical of the alliance of interests that fought the king. Some were Puritan zealots who believed God had ordained the king's death. Major General Thomas Harrison, signature 17, was the most prominent among them. Others, like the suspected atheist Henry Martin, signature 31, were Republicans. John Downes was neither, one of the last to sign and one of the first to surrender in the hope of mercy. Alongside the 20 signatories were 9 others considered a threat to the state. They included the radical preacher Hugh Peters, the politicized soldier Daniel Axtell, and the lawyer John Cook. Everyone else on Parliament's side in the Civil War had been pardoned, but the new king wanted someone to pay for his father's death. His new Parliament had selected these few to stand trial for the many.
And so we see how His Majesty, now lately and happily restored, tempers justice with mercy and righteous anger with wisdom. Only these miscreants gathered up here, and some few others, are accepted.
Gentlemen of the jury, Sir Heneage has made the case against the defendants. My task is to deliver to you, plain and true, the law.
The judge, Sir Orlando Bridgeman, was a royalist lawyer who had lived quietly but well under Cromwell. He needed to prove himself to the new regime. He hinted those who showed contrition might avoid death. But he insisted there could be no mercy for anyone who argued the king had been justly condemned under the authority of Parliament.
The king can do no wrong. The king, I say, can do no wrong. It's in our law books, very frequent. His ministers, his agents, his instruments, if they do wrong, though by his command, they're punishable. But he can do no wrong, and so he cannot be punished for any wrong. So, this is the law. What are you to say, then, of men who did not only conspire and consult against the king, but took it upon themselves to judge, to condemn, nay, to put him to death, and this before his very door, the banqueting house of Whitehall, at noonday, in the very place where in royal majesty he used to hear ambassadors and to have his honorable entertainments? This is so aggravated a villainy that truly I cannot tell what to say. That blood cries out to you for vengeance and will not be appeased but by a bloody sacrifice.
And so, the king-killers prepared to argue for their lives. Their words would give a glimpse into the soul of Cromwell's republic.
Let the first prisoner be brought before the bar.
Thomas Harrison.
Major General Thomas Harrison was the son of a Staffordshire butcher, a religious zealot and ruthless soldier who became one of Cromwell's closest advisors. Harrison had signed the king's death warrant because he believed that Charles I was responsible for the bloodshed of the Civil War. It was God's will he be punished. Harrison was a Puritan fundamentalist who belonged to a sect known as the Fifth Monarchy Men. They believed that the king's death was prophesied in the Bible and would usher in a 1,000-year rule by Christ and his saints.
I shall devour the whole earth. I shall tread it down and break it in pieces.
Harrison's burning faith had made him a formidable opponent on the battlefield. He was still dangerous, for he knew there were others in the court, but not on trial, who had once shared his convictions. This true story is taken from the original transcripts of the trial of the regicides.
Thomas Harrison, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
My lord, have I liberty to speak?
There is nothing for you now but guilty or not guilty.
My lord, I have been a close prisoner near these 3 months, and I've spoke to no one in that time, and yet you would now demand of me a legal answer? I would willingly render an account of my doings, but I pray you, advise me first on the manner of this court and the charge against me. What a contest there has been in these nations in recent years, I think we do all know. And yet I see many who now sit in judgment that once were active.
Oh, you're mistaken if you appeal to your countrymen. They'll cry you out and shame you.
Maybe some will, my lord. But I'm sure there are others who will not.
I think every true English heart keeps within itself a bleeding register of the story of the trial and execution of His Blessed Majesty. In the year 1648, as is well known, the King and his Parliament, after many weary years of dispute and war, were about the business of peace.
The business of peace had been dragging on since the end of the Civil War and the defeat of Charles I. Though a prisoner, the king refused to make the concessions demanded by Parliament in return for his throne. Instead, he played for time and schemed with Parliament's enemies. This stalemate lasted for 2 years, by which time Parliament and its army began to fall out. The king was confident he was indispensable. The golden ball cast between the parties, as he was called. But all that changed in the summer of 1648. From his prison, the king instigated a royalist uprising. The royalist armies were defeated, but only after a second civil war, more brutal than the first. Thomas Harrison labeled Charles that man of blood, and the title stuck. He and other radicals believed there could be no end to the killing while the king lived.
They seize upon the blessed person of our sacred king. They bring him to London, and they proceed to sit upon him, arraign, try, sentence, condemn, kill, I was about to say, crucify him. He, my lord, was the man who brought the king a prisoner up to London. He was one of those that sat upon him, sentenced him, signed the warrant, the bloody warrant to cut off his sacred head. All this and more we shall prove, and you shall see as clear as day the wicked malice of this insolent man.
It was on that very night the king finally arrived in London, my lord, brought up from the island by the prisoner, as has been said.
Mr. Nutley was a lawyer close to the Army Council. It took him behind closed doors.
Having some business in Whitehall, I did chance to overhear the prisoner in conversation with others of the Army Council. He was telling all that had passed between His late Majesty and himself in the coach.
In the coach, was I?
Yes, sir. It was in the coach.
The then Colonel Harrison had been chosen to escort the king from the Isle of Wight.
Colonel Harrison! They say that you're involved in a plot to murder me.
Harrison and his fellow revolutionaries had something more ambitious in mind: to prove in open court why the king must die.
You may set your mind at rest on this point. The Lord has reserved you for a public example of justice. And what is to be done will be open to the eyes of the world. This was not a thing done in a corner. The sound of it has been in most nations, I believe. Many a time, with tears and prayers, I have sought from that God to whom you and all nations are less than a drop of water of the bucket, assurances that the things that were done, though astonishing, yet they were of God.
Will you then make God the author of your treasons? Remember, sir, where you are, in an assembly of Christians.
My lord, what was done by the authority of Parliament, which was then the supreme authority, and those that acted under that authority are not to be questioned by any lesser power. Now then, I have heard this gentleman say that we did assume and usurp that authority. I say this was done rather in the fear of the Lord.
Will you now render yourself so desperate that you care not what language you let fall?
When the king set up his standard against the people...
Truly, Mr. Harrison, this must not be suffered. This does not at all belong to you.
It does belong to me. I would have abhorred to have brought the king to account, had not the blood of Englishmen that had been shed...
Hold your hand a while, sir! Not so fast! This is like a new impeachment of the king, to justify again your treasons against him.
I did what I did as out of conscience to the Lord. My aim in all was the glory of God, and the good of his people, and the welfare of the whole Commonwealth.
We need hear no further evidence. The jury will consider their verdict. You need not retire, I think.
The court moved at deadly speed to silence this dangerous voice.
Guilty as charged, my lord.
Tried, found guilty and sentenced on the Thursday, he went to the gibbet 36 hours later, before the trials of most of his fellow regicides had even begun.
You that are the prisoner at the bar, the judgment of this court is this: that you be led back to the place from whence you came, and then drawn upon a hurdle to the place of execution. And there you shall be hanged by the neck, and being alive, shall be cut down, and your privy members cut off, your entrails taken out of your body, and you living, the same to be burned before your eyes, and your head to be cut off. Your body divided into 4 quarters, and your head and quarters to be disposed of at the pleasure of His Majesty the King. And may God have mercy upon your soul.
I go to suffer on account of the most glorious cause that ever was in the world.
Where's your good old cause now, Harrison?
Here, in my bosom, and I'm going to seal it with my blood. Do not think that I'm afraid to die. This morning, before I came here, I've been much hurried up and down many stairs. I know not why, unless it be that they wished to waste my spirit before they brought me here. I am much spent, but I'm not afraid, Thanks be to God. Many times in the day of battle has he covered my head. By God, I've leapt over a wall. By God, I've run through a troop. And by my God, I will go through this death, and he will make it easy to me.
To Charing Cross this morning to see Thomas Harrison hanged, drawn and quartered, he looking as cheerfully as any man could do in that condition. He said he was sure to come shortly at the right hand of Christ to judge them that now have judged him. Thus it was my chance to see the king beheaded at Whitehall and to see the first blood shed in revenge for the blood of the king at Charing Cross. Within all afternoon, setting up shelves in my study.
You, Peters.
Every revolution requires its spokesman, its public face. In the revolution against King Charles I, Hugh Peters was that man. A firebrand minister who'd come from America to destroy the English monarchy. From his demeanor in court, it was hard to imagine. But his trial was to reveal how inspirational this Puritan Ayatollah had once been, and why the royalists feared him. This true story is taken from the transcripts of the trial of the regicides.
This man we will show to have been a principal actor in the sad tragedy of the murdered king. Though he neither sat in their so-called High Court nor signed the death warrant, yet he was a chief conspirator with Cromwell at several times and in several places, and this we will prove. But more than this, he preached many sermons to the soldiery in direct terms for taking away the king's life. He used his profession, wherein he should have been a minister of peace, to make himself a trumpeter of war.
In the years before the Civil War, Hugh Peters had fled to America to escape Charles I's persecution of the Puritans. But when war came, Peters returned.
Never fear, lads. God is with you. God is with you.
Peters gained fame for his eve of battle sermons. He became close to prominent generals like Oliver Cromwell and drew Cromwell to his vision of an England without kings. At a time when many ordinary people considered the king divine, Peters never feared to attack him.
All the kings of the nation, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people.
Just before the king was put on trial, Hugh Peters visited him. Peters once claimed to have brought 100 sinners to Christ in a week. That day, he expected to make another sinner repent.
No, sir.
He would not hear me, the poor wretch.
Do you know the prisoner at the bar?
I do know him.
Dr. Noble's profession had allowed him to get close to the defendant.
You are a doctor of medicine?
I am, my lord.
Continue, Dr. Noble.
On one occasion, we were discoursing concerning the division that arose between Parliament and the army concerning the king. And this he told me. Fearing that some in Parliament designed to lay hands on himself and Oliver Cromwell, both being then in London, they escaped and rode hard for it. And as they rode, made a halt, and there consulted with one another how they should once and for all settle the kingdom in peace.
According to Noble's story, it was here the fateful decision was taken.
Their conclusion, he said, was this: that they must seize the king, bring him to justice, try him for his life, and cut off his head.
Lord. Lord.
If you will be heard, you must step forward. Your voice is very faint. Come forward, sir.
Just occasionally, there were flashes of the old Hugh Peters.
May it please your lordship to give you an account of the business.
We will hear you as we must.
I began no war, my lord, nor have been the trumpeter of it, as has been said by this gentleman. But being here, though not upon any design, and seeing the state of England, I did stay to see what God might do.
You stayed to see how you might bring the kingdom to be a commonwealth, I think.
Sir, even our enemies, persons of no mean quality, were obliged to confess that in those days God was with us.
Peters was a broken man, but he had touched a nerve. Everyone could remember when parliamentary victories were trumpeted as the workings of God's will. Peters had gone further. The court intended to prove Peters had preached that Parliament's victory was God's judgment on the king's wickedness. It was now the duty of godly men to punish the king for his sins.
The next witness did hear the prisoner at his preachings, and you will be the more satisfied at his malicious bearing towards his late majesty that he did not scruple to dress in the cloak of godliness.
How long was this before the king was murdered?
But a few days before the House of Commons made that thing called an Act for his trial, my lord, when the king had been brought to Windsor, but not yet to London.
You're very precise, sir. Are you sure you saw me at that time? I do not know you. I think, do you know me?
Why, yes, sir. I know you. And saw you there.
Mr. Beaver was a Londoner, with time on his hands and a lively curiosity to go with it.
I was passing through St. Margaret's churchyard and perceived all the churchyard to be full of muskets and pikes upon the ground, and so asked some soldiers that were there, "What's the business?" They told me they were guarding the Parliament that was keeping a solemn fast inside. Who preaches, say I? They say Mr. Peters is just now gone up into the pulpit. So in I go, and crowding near the pulpit saw many of the members of that Parliament sitting side by side with those they call the grandees, which is to say the leading officers of their army. Alongside of me and all around me stood the redcoats, the troopers, some even sitting on the stairs of the pulpit.
There's now great discourse and talk in the world. You've heard it as well as I. What they say? Will you cut off the king's head? The head of a Protestant prince and your king?
To those who speak thus, I say, turn to your Bible. There you'll find an answer. Whosoever sheds men's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Amen. And I see neither King Charles, nor Prince Charles, nor Prince Rupert, nor Prince Maurice, nor any of that rabble accepted out of it.
My lord, I find it impossible to bear down so many witnesses. Though I do say this, they are marvellous, uncharitable in what they say. I do not deny I preached, but not these things. As for malice, I had none in me. I have not persecuted any with malice. I am very sorry to hear of my carriage toward the king. It is my great trouble. I would have brought the comfort of the word of God to him if I could. But he would not hear me.
The prisoner has no more to offer, it seems. Gentlemen of the jury, I hope you make an example of him. For surely the death of this carnal prophet will preach a better lesson than any he ever gave in his life.
Help me, Lord Jesus, please. Oh, Lord. Lord.
Come, brother, take some comfort. We shall knock at heaven's gate, and the saints will greet us like guests at a wedding.
I'm afraid my wedding garment is not quite ready, Mr. Cook. I wish I'd never been vain in a vain world. I'm heartily sorry I was popular and better known to others than to myself.
The next defendant had political beliefs that resonate in Britain to this day. Henry Martin was no man of God, but a suspected atheist and notorious womanizer. It was said that he would have preferred to command a regiment of whores rather than a regiment of horse. But he was also a Republican. He wanted England ruled not by kings, but by Parliament and the people. Henry Martin's republicanism provided the key that unlocked the legal framework that would kill a king. This is a true story taken from the original transcripts of the trial of the regicides, the king killers.
My lord, here is one who sat and signed, a proud and insolent member of that high court of injustice. He did both sign and seal the document for summoning the court and the warrant for execution. He sat almost every day in judgment, and in particular the day of the sentence. And this we shall prove.
My lord, I will not waste the court's time and deny the matter of fact that I sat and signed. But I would, by your leave, set aside the malice. The indictment reads, I believe, maliciously, murderously, and traitorously. This I would set aside.
Well, clearly he thinks a man may sentence a king to death innocently, charitably, and honestly. But because he would wipe off the malice, we shall prove that in all he was malicious and merry, and that he gave the foundation for that advice upon which they proceeded against the king.
It was when the army brought His Majesty to London for his trial, my lord, I and some other gentlemen resolved to discover their plans in the hope that we might attempt the king's escape.
The prosecution produced Sir Purbeck Temple, ardent royalist and would-be Scarlet Pimpernel.
By giving money, I was able to come near the painted chamber where their council met. I espied a hole in the wall under the hanging, and there I placed myself till their council came. After a prayer, they fell to debating the manner of trying the king when he should come before them. Even as they spoke, there came news that the king was landing at Sir Robert Cotton's stairs.
Excuse me, sir. The king has arrived.
At which Cromwell ran to a window, looking onto the king as he came up the garden. And as he looked, he turned as white as a wall.
Well, my masters, he has come. And now we are doing that great work which the whole nation will be full of. Let us resolve here what answer we shall give the king when he comes before us. For the first question he will ask us will be this: by what authority do we try him?
To this, none answered for a long while, until up spoke Henry Martin, the prisoner at the bar.
Well, then let it be this. In the name of the Commons and Parliament assembled, and all the good people of England.
Are we agreed?
Yes.
Come now. What matter is it to say, let it be acted by the good people of England, since we did all in the name of the Commons assembled in Parliament?
That was no parliament, sir, but a mere fag end, a veritable rump of a parliament. Aye, sir, and with corrupt maggots in it.
Well, sir, if I have been misled on this, I think I am not alone. Indeed, my lord, I could say I see a great many faces here today that were once misled as well as myself. But this I will not insist upon, except to say this. He that gives obedience to the authority that is in being, I think he is of a peaceable disposition, and very far from being a traitor.
But Henry Martin was not the stuff martyrs are made of. Having reminded the court of these uncomfortable truths, he pleaded for clemency and was spared the death penalty. Jailed for the rest of his life, he took comfort in the thought that a king who had been restored by Parliament was at least better than one appointed by God.
If it were possible for the king's blood to be in his body again, I could wish it with all my heart, along with every drop that was shed in the late wars. I also judge His Majesty that now is to be king upon the best title under heaven, for he was called in by Parliament, being the representative body of England. And I shall pay obedience to him during my life, be it long or short.
John Cook.
Now, at last, the time had come for the regicide's court to hear what happened when an English king was put on trial for treason.
My lord, he that brought the axe from the tower is not more instrumental than this man.
My lord, I would trouble the court for pen, ink, and paper.
Give it him, Mr. Clerk.
I thank you.
John Cook was a man in love with the law. At Gray's Inn, where radical lawyers like him congregated, he was known for his ingenious legal arguments. In the aftermath of the Civil War, the question of whether it would be lawful to try the king was a burning issue. Cook tried out his daring arguments on his protégé, Mr. Nutley.
But surely, Mr. Cook, it is a maxim that the king can do no wrong. By what law, then, can a king be condemned?
Put the case, Mr. Nutley, of a man entrusted with a sword for the protection and preservation of his people. What then if this man employ that sword to their destruction? Well, by this he declares himself to be an enemy to that people and deserves a most exemplary and severe punishment. This I would call the law of nature.
Do you know the prisoner at the bar?
Mr. Nutley found himself in the difficult position of being called to give evidence against his old friend.
Truly, I knew the gentleman well. Indeed, sir, I owe my all to him, as he was pleased to do me and some others the favour to reason law with us at Gray's Inn.
Surely then it is a great aggravation to his crime that he that knew the law so well should so much transgress it. Very well, Mr. Nutley. You'll tell us, if you please, how this learned gentleman acted in the business against his king.
The first day of bringing His Majesty to his trial was Saturday, January 20th, 1649. The king was brought up as a prisoner and put within the bar, and there was a kind of speech made by Mr. Bradshaw, who was then president of that court. Lord President, they called him. Mr. Bradshaw spoke to the king in this manner. I think I shall repeat the very words. Charles Stuart, present King of England.
Charles Stuart, present King of England, the Commons of England assembled in Parliament, taking notice of the effusions of blood in the land, which is fixed on you as the author of it, and whereof you are guilty, have resolved to bring you to trial and to judgment. And for this cause, this tribunal is erected.
It hadn't been easy to put together the legal team to take on the case of the people versus the King of England. John Cook only got the job of prosecutor when a more experienced lawyer dropped out on grounds of ill health. For Mr. Cook, it was a chance to put his daring theories into practice. The judge in the King's trial was John Bradshaw, an obscure barrister from the northwest. London judges had made themselves scarce when Parliament cast around for someone to preside over its court. They knew a poisoned chalice when they saw one. Everything that followed turned upon the question of whether or not the king was above the law. The scene was set for a contest between two irreconcilable views of constitutional power. As this trial without precedent began, no one could predict which would prevail.
My lord, on behalf of the Commons of England and of all the people thereof, I do accuse Charles Stuart here present of high treason and high misdemeanours, and I do, in the name of the Commons of England, desire the charge may be read to him. It is charged that Charles Stuart, the present King of England, did engage in a wicked design to overthrow the rights and liberties of the people, and that he did traitorously and maliciously levy war against the Parliament.
And so the charge was read by Mr. Cook. The words were very strong, saying His Majesty was to blame for all, and concluding that he was but a tyrant, traitor and murderer to the people, at which conclusion I did observe His Majesty to laugh somewhat.
Sir, you have now heard the charge. The court expects your answer.
I require to know by what authority, I mean lawful authority, I am called here. For there are many unlawful authorities, thieves, robbers by the highway, and in truth, I recognize not 8 faces here.
Justice! Justice, I say!
Remember, I am your king! Your lawful king. I have a trust imposed in me by God, and will not betray it now to answer to this new, unlawful authority. I ask again, by what authority am I called here?
You must answer in the name of the people of England. Aye. Of which you are elected king.
Elected? No, sir, you are sorely mistaken in that. England was never an elected kingdom, but an hereditary kingdom for these near 1,000 years. I tell you, I stand more for the liberty of my people than any that come as my pretended judges.
Justice, I say! Justice!
Silence in the court! Silence!
There was still a chance that the Axeman would not be called for. If the king had recognized the court's authority, he would also have acknowledged Parliament's authority, enough to satisfy at least some of his judges. But as the trial continued over a second and third day, it became clear that Charles would never concede. To break the stalemate, the court prepared to move straight to sentencing.
I saw Mr. Cook once more, on the third day, at Gray's Inn, about 10 or 11 o'clock of the evening.
Cook! I'm sorry to see you still up to the ears in this business.
Mr. Nutley, I serve the people in this.
I believe there is 1,000 to 1 will not thank you.
You will see strange things yet, sir. We must wait upon God.
How can you treat a man as gracious as he...
Still, I pressed him, and he acknowledged to me that the king was as gracious and wise a prince as any was in the world, which made me reflect upon him again and ask how he could press those things as I had heard.
There is only one course we can take.
You have forced him into this corner.
No, you know...
Finally, he spoke thus.
That is not the law.
It is the law. The king must die, and the monarchy die with him. Boy.
It was on the third day he urged that the king's refusal to plead be taken pro confesso. That is to say, as an admission of guilt.
Thank you, Mr. Nutley. And what said His Majesty to this?
As before, disputing their very right to try him.
My Lord President, my humble motion is this, that the prisoner be directed to make a positive answer, either by way of confession or negation, which, if he refuse to do, it shall be taken pro confesso, and the court may proceed according to justice to sentencing.
Well, sir?
It is the liberty and freedom of the people of England that I stand for. If a power may alter the fundamental laws of the kingdom, then I do not know what subject he is in England that can be sure of his life, or anything that he calls his
You
own.
must submit and deliver a punctual and direct answer to the charge.
I will not. I require to know how the Commons of England became a court of judgment.
It is not for prisoners to require.
Sir, I am no ordinary prisoner. Show me the jurisdiction where reason cannot be heard.
We show it to you here. The Commons of England. It is by this and by the good people of England that we shall have your plea and no more of your reasons.
'Tis false!
Down with the whore!
Oliver Cromwell is a traitor!
Shoot them!
Well, sir, remember that the king is not suffered to give the reasons for the liberty and freedom of his subjects.
How great a friend you have been to the laws and liberties of the people. Let all England and the world judge. Good.
In truth, my lord, there was no trial.
We do not understand you, Mr. Cook.
His Majesty would not plead, and therefore I say there was no trial.
And have you anything else to offer?
But 12 poor words, my lord. All I did was what was required of me by my profession. And I hope in this business that it appears I gave good and honest counsel. I did nothing but what I was required to do by my clients. I did not invent nor contrive anything. I spoke as they would have me speak, and when I spoke, it was for my fee. This, my lord, you may call greed, but not, I think, malice.
I hope he will think it no unkindness in me that I do now demand judgment against him, not for my fee, my lord, but because it is just.
Well, I have done, my lord, except to humbly desire to acknowledge His Majesty's favour that I was not put in irons. Had it been in some other kingdom, they would have served us as John the Baptist in prison. I thank you. I have had a fair trial.
A vital issue at the trial of the king killers was whether obeying orders was any defence.
My lord, and now we come to the guards, and this gentleman, one Daniel Axtell. He was commander of that black guard, that cruel and bloody guard that, during the time of the trial, kept order in the court at Westminster Hall. And with what fury and malice he did so. You will see.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Axtell was a soldier through and through. The parliamentary cause had taken him from a grocer's shop in London to the great battles of the Civil War, and then to the King's trial. Daniel Axtell would argue that in all of this, he'd been a good soldier who'd done nothing more than follow his orders.
My lord, I was present at all the trials of the king and very near him.
The intrepid Sir Purbeck Temple returned to the witness stand.
I saw him, the prisoner at the bar, to be the most active person there. And during the time that the king was asking to be heard, he did laugh and entertain his soldiers by scoffing out loud.
Sir, you have now heard the charge. The court expects your answer.
Daniel Axtell was the heart and soul of Parliament's new model army. After the war, these citizen soldiers had become a revolutionary force calling for equal rights for all men. They now expected justice to be done against the man they considered to be their enemy rather than their king.
I recognize not 8 faces here.
Justice! Justice, I say!
Remember, I am your king! Your lawful king.
You must answer in the name of the people of England, of which you are elected king.
He gave gunpowder to them, which they did fire in the palms of their hands. That did not only offend His Majesty's smell, but enforced him to rise up out of his chair and with his hand to turn away the smoke.
I see that I'm under a power here.
Justice! Justice! Execution! Execution!
At which this person, Mr. Axtell, commanded his soldiers to cry out, "Justice! Justice against the king!"
Pardon me, sir. You say the cry was for justice. And then you say justice against the king. I pray you. Which was it?
Not against the king, but I conceived you meant against the king.
You do but conceive, sir.
Sir, it could not be otherwise applied.
Sir, I am upon my life. I hope you will hear me patiently.
You will be heard, Mr. Axtell, in all that is pertinent.
My lord, they say justice is God's attribute and great ordinance. To call for justice can be no treason, I think.
There is more, my lord.
I require to know how the Commons of England became a court of law.
It is not for prisoners to require.
Sir, I am no ordinary prisoner.
I did hear the king demand of Bradshaw by what authority they proceeded thus strangely to try him. And Bradshaw replied that it was in the name of the Commons and the good people of the kingdom.
We show it to you here. It is by this...
At this, there was a kind of hubbub in the court.
And no more of your reasons!
The people of England, 'tis false! Not half the people, not a quarter. Where are they? All their consents?
Down with the law!
Oliver Cromwell is a traitor!
Shoot them! Shoot them!
Silence! Order your arms!
My lord, if a lady will talk impertinently, it can be no treason to bid her hold her tongue.
A lady talking pertinently enough, then you took upon you to command soldiers to fire at her.
Who was this lady?
It was my Lady Fairfax, the wife of Sir Thomas Fairfax.
Sir Thomas Fairfax was Commander-in-Chief of Parliament's armies at the time of the King's execution. Yet he had escaped trial as a regicide. He had switched sides at just the right moment and helped restore the monarchy. Fairfax signalled his loyalty by presenting Charles II with a horse descended from the charger he had ridden to victory against the King's father.
My lord, let us shorten the time and speak of authority.
As to what?
I did not move a day, but by special command.
By whose command?
The Lord Fairfax. We did all under him.
Your commission was not to put the king to death, but rather to preserve his life.
I am to serve and obey my superior officers in all. That is my commission. If I do not, I die for it by the law of war.
Do not sew these fig leaves together. You did not go by any authority at all, but you followed your own lusts.
My lord, here I must ground my bottom, and if I perish, I perish. I did but my duty. I am no more guilty than His Excellency the Lord Fairfax. Gentlemen of the jury, I leave my life, my case, my all in your hands. Remember your ancestors. Remember your posterity. I never heard before that words were treason. You see a dead man living.
John Downes.
The case against the regicides was nearing its climax.
Here before you stands one who sat and signed, who judged and condemned to death. But he has admitted as much, and his confession is recorded. We need not prove it further here. In return for his confession and for the many tears he has shed, he shall be spared the full rigor of the law in respect of his manifest guilt. But let us hear from him now what passed that last day in their High Court of Injustice.
Prisoner at the bar, let us have your answer.
John Downes was an MP of long standing, elected to the House of Commons before the Civil War. In the great clashes between King and Parliament, he played no recorded part. He was first and foremost a businessman. During the Civil War, he made a fortune selling confiscated royalist estates. His role now was to reveal what happened when Charles I at last offered a compromise to his accusers.
My lord, I was thrust into that number, but never was in consultation about the thing. Never did I know of His Majesty's being brought to London till he came. Then they said I must take my share of the business. So I came in. On that day, His Majesty, with a great deal of composedness and wisdom, told them to this effect: because you are so ready to give sentence, I think it fit that I let you know that I have something I desire to speak of to my Parliament. Something which will be satisfactory to you all, and will be for the immediate settlement of the kingdom in peace.
A hasty sentence once passed might sooner be repented than recalled, and therefore I do desire that you will hear me. And if you will, I doubt not, I shall give satisfaction to you all here, and to my people after that.
Have we hearts of stone? Are we men? We must hear him.
What ails thee? Are you mad that you cannot sit and be quiet?
I cannot be quiet. I cannot. Mr. Lord President, I would speak. I am not satisfied to give my consent to this sentence, but I have reasons to offer to you against it, and I desire the court may adjourn to hear me.
Well, sir, perhaps you will now tell us why you have put this trouble and disturbance upon the court.
I desire not his death, but his life, that the nation may be settled in peace. What would you have? What would you have? I cried. You said that after such a long and bloody war, His Majesty would never agree to any concessions as might secure the Parliament's party. Now, the King is pleased to offer to Parliament such things as should be satisfactory to us all, and I say we should hear him.
So then, we now see what great reason and grounds this gentleman has to hinder our business here today. The bottom of it is this. He would save the life of the king and would have us hear what he is now pleased to offer. Plainly, he does not know what others here know too well. We are dealing with the hardest-hearted man that lives upon the earth. Nothing he has to say is worth the time spent in the hearing of it.
My Lord General, if some good may come...
Some good? Good come from this man against whom the Lord has witnessed.
The Lord has witnessed indeed, but there must always be some found who would be either skeptics or infidels.
Come, it is not fit that the court should be hindered from their duty by one peevish man. Let us be about it without any more ado.
Sir, the charge has called you tyrant, traitor, and murderer, and a public enemy to the Commonwealth of England. The court finds the prisoner at the bar guilty as charged. Clerk, read the sentence.
Will you not hear me a word, sir?
You're not to be heard after the sentence.
I may speak a sentence by your favor, and I may speak...
Judge!
By your favor, a sentence, sir! By your favor, hold!
Justice!
Hold a little. I say...
Suffered for to speak. Expect what justice others will have.
Mr. Downes, there is one particular, that after so many convictions, yet you signed the death warrant.
What those times were. How impetuous the soldiers, how not a man dared disown them or speak against them. You, that are my judges, I beg you, look back and consider. Government was tossed and turned and tumbled. I did not know which way to be safe.
So, my lord, we come to it at last. That dark hour when the king died. And here before you one last witness who, though he played his part in the tragedy as one of the king's guards, yet through some small kindnesses and consideration shown towards his late majesty, has earned pardon. You shall hear from him now the manner of the king's martyrdom.
Matthew Tomlinson, once a colonel in Parliament's army.
That morning of the day the king died, when we came to the scaffold, I went as far as to the entrance upon it. There was the block and axe lying down about the middle of the scaffold. The king upon the scaffold looked a little while about, but seeing that the crowds were held at some distance, he turned about to me and began to direct his speech to me.
I must tell you, the freedom and liberty of the people consists in having government and laws by which their life and goods may be most their own. 'Tis not for having a share in government. That is nothing pertaining to them. A subject and a sovereign are clear and different things. And 'tis for that, now, that I come here. If I had given way to an arbitrary way, to have all the laws changed according to the power of the sword, I need not have come here. Therefore I tell you, I am the martyr of the people.
Is there any more from this witness?
Nothing, my lord. The king was brought to the block. He gave the sign. The axe fell. Such a groan came from the crowd as I never heard before. Never wish to hear again.
It took just over a week to try the 29 regicides. All 29 were found guilty. 10 faced the ultimate penalty, including Thomas Harrison, John Cook, Hugh Peters, and Daniel Axtell. "19 regicides had their death sentences commuted to life imprisonment, including John Downes and Henry Martin. Downes lasted just 6 years locked up in the Tower of London, but Martin survived as a prisoner for 20, until he finally died insane. Just 8 years after Martin's death, Charles II's brother, King James, was deposed by Parliament. His throne was offered to a Dutch prince, William of Orange, in return for a Bill of Rights guaranteeing fundamental freedoms. Parliament and the Crown were now in business together. And so some of the principles that the regicides died for became cornerstones of the system of government called constitutional monarchy, still with us today.
We were not traitors, nor murderers, nor fanatics, but true Christians and good Commonwealth men, fixed and constant to the principles of sanctity, truth, justice, and mercy, which the Parliament and army dared and engaged for. We sought the public good, and would have enfranchised the people and secured the welfare of the whole groaning creation if the nation had not more delighted in servitude.
With suits of armour weighing 100 pounds, jousting was certainly not for the faint-hearted. We've recreated all the colour and skill of a medieval tournament, with a few damsels in distress thrown in for good measure. Join us at Pembroke Castle, Saturday at 8 on 4. Coming up next tonight, Father Ted.